had a colleague of mine, he's Korean, and he was sharing about a church potluck at their church. And it's vastly different. He said, well, a potluck's a potluck. How can they be that different? And so, Korean culture versus our culture, that's how there might be some differences. And so in their church, he talks about how their culture is very age-driven. Even if someone is older than you by even something like a year. Imagine this playing out in high school. Someone's older than you by a year, and you have to kind of bow. You know, bowing is their culture, not handshaking. And so you have to bow, and the younger person bows lower. I mean, imagine that getting not abused in high school settings, right? Or junior high settings, where even 1 year would mean the other person has to bow lower. And we tried this in class. I said, okay, let's do this. I'm a few years older than him, so he's gonna try to bow. In my head, I'm gonna bow obnoxiously low to just, I don't know if he has a sonar or what he has, but he instinctively knew how to bow lower. And so you just have a culture that's very age-driven, that's very respect for people who are older, again, even if it's 1 year. So you have a church potluck, and look around our room and go, well, we have older people, we have younger people, we have kids, we have every age. And you say, well, based on age, we send those people through the line first. They find their seats first. Well, then comes the young people. Now, all of the tables are filled, and there's a funny twist here. In their culture, and I don't know if this is their church specifically or if this is broadly Korean culture. I don't want to be misrepresenting their culture, but at least at this church, the pastor sits down at a table by himself. Because he is a person of honor, they honor him by kind of giving him his own space. And so the people of the first generation here who are still trying to respect the old culture, they're giving him his space, not sitting at his table. So pastor sits alone, all of the older people are seated. So now there's no space for the younger people. What do? They have to have somewhere to sit. Well, they have kind of grown up as a second generation American here, and so they sit with the pastor because there's no other seat. So now there's this weird twist where this is the table of honor, and in this ironic twist, the youngest people who shouldn't be having the honor now have the honor of sitting with the pastor. Now, if at any point you thought this story sounds strange, that's because you're from here, and that's okay. The cultural concept here is called power distance. It's the degree to which people across a strata share decision-making, right? So think of your office, the degree to which your manager shares the decision-making process with you. If that is a shared process, as it often is in our culture, that's a very flat power distance. If it's the higher-ups make the decisions and the lowerlings just execute, that's a high power distance. And this can relate to any kind of relationship. It can relate to parents and children, husbands and wives, pastors and congregants. And so it's an interesting way in which kind of status drives how we do something in a culture, in a particular culture. I bring up this story because today's story that we're gonna be looking at in Matthew chapter 15, it's a bit of an odd one. And I just need to kind of call that out and say, this is odd. There are some things that are going to strike you as odd. Not that anybody asked, but everyone else likes to know what's your favorite passage. If you ever want to know my least favorite story, this is actually it today, just because there's some oddity to it. There's some cultural things going on. So I'm going to try to bring those things out. But culture is this thing that kind of sets us apart. It's a way of showing who's in and who belongs and who is an outsider, who doesn't belong. In the last sermon, I talked about judging people based on the outside. This was something the Pharisees were keen to do, based on cultural perceptions of which exterior appearance gives the impression of this is a good person, that's a bad person. And oftentimes, this can be just very, very random. Today, Jesus is going to again challenge our perceptions of this in a very dramatic fashion. And the first thing we see is that he is going to have mercy for pariahs. Starting in verse 21, it says, "And Jesus went away from there, and he withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, 'Have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon.' But he did not answer her a word. And the disciples came and begged him, saying, 'Send her away, for she's crying out to us.' He answered, 'I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.' But she came and knelt before him, saying, 'Lord, help me.' And he answered, 'It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.' She said, 'Yes, Lord, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table.' Then Jesus answered her, 'O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire.' And her daughter was healed instantly." So I'm going to unpack this because on the one hand, it seems like Jesus is just silent. And then he's kind of just talking to his own group going, look, I'm only for you guys. And then he kind of says something that's mildly racist sounding towards her. And then at the end is go, hey, great job. And so if you're like me, you're reading this story going, wait, where did this twist come out of nowhere from? Well, we're going to talk about that. Let's start with where they're at. Jesus has just left the Sea of Galilee, and he's headed over to the region of Tyre and Sidon. This is right across the northern border into modern-day Lebanon. Now, this is a place that has a very complicated history and past. And Matthew now has had two very distinct references to this area. He has a little bit, I don't want to say fascination, but why does he keep bringing up these towns? I just looked through a ton of Old Testament references to these two towns, and it is all over the Old Testament of how are they referenced. The problem is half of that stack of verses references it in very good ways, some things that were helpful to the people of Israel. The other half of that stack of references tons of bad things where these were kind of the enemy of God's people. And so you go, well, which is it? Well, the answer is it's both. It's just a complicated area. And so what's interesting is Matthew in this chapter, in the rest of this chapter, the three stories we're going to look at today, he's casting this whole section as being in Gentile territory. Even though in the middle section it looks like they kind of come back to the Sea of Galilee, I think Matthew's trying to make it clear Jesus is working with Gentiles. So there's one story in particular that I want to pick out of the Old Testament to talk about this area. And this is coming from 1 Kings. It's the story of King Ahab. Now, if you remember, King Ahab was one of these who was just a terrible, terrible king. 1 Kings 16:30 says, and Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. So if you take that verse and then you kind of go and see what they did, and he's doing worse, he did some terrible, terrible things. He set up pagan places of worship. He made a temple to Baal in Samaria. Remember, the Jews hated the Samaritans, and they would go around Samaria. Part of it's this kind of Old Testament history and the kind of cultural dynamics there that they didn't like. Well, King Ahab, was part of this. But one of the worst things that they did, is that he married, or the cherry on the cake is that he married the king of Sidon. That's this town right here. Sorry, he didn't marry the king of Sidon. He married her daughter, Jezebel. Gotta get the pronouns right. Need to get outside of Washington for a minute. Okay. 1 Kings 16:33 says, Ahab made an Asherah, that's a place of worship, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. This is a bad guy. So in response to this, God sends Elijah to prophesy against King Ahab and Jezebel. And the sign of this prophecy is that there's not going to be any more rain until Elijah gives the word. So essentially, it's going to cause a massive drought. Elijah gives this message. It's a hit and run. He gets out of town, and he goes and he hides out in the Jordan Valley. And God sends ravens to bring him food, and he stays in that little section kind of hidden until the river dries up on account of there being no rain. And so God sends him to this widow woman who would take care of him until the drought ends. And she has to feed him first, and after that, her oil and flour would not run out until it rains again. But here's the interesting thing about that widow woman. Guess where she's from? She's from Sidon, the same place. So just put this picture in your head. You've got the prophet Elijah who's prophesying against evil King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, the daughter of a Sidonian king from this area. And then God sends Elijah to go hide in the region of Sidon with a widow who takes care of him. And so that explains in a nutshell the complexity of this area. On the one hand, clearly someone who's evil, doing evil things, working against God. On the other hand, a kind of helpless, powerless widow who is God's hands and feet to the prophet Elijah and keeps him alive. Both are from this region. So this shows you some of the complexity. So this goes all through their history, where we could look and see like some of the good things that came out of this area is there's one of the kings of Tyre. He is the one who supplied the building material. He gave all of the timber, and he gave about modern equivalent of about $4 million worth of gold to King Solomon to rebuild the temple. And so you go, well, this is an area mixed with good and bad. On the other hand, it produced Queen Jezebel, who's kind of like the poster child of what it means to be an evil queen. And so here's this story where Jesus has now gone to this area. Now, if you're thinking of a map, Galilee is kind of there in the north and Jerusalem's more in the south. Some Pharisees came from Jerusalem to Galilee, and then Jesus goes to Tyre and Sidon. So this is the furthest away that he's been in Matthew's gospel to date. And he uses this word behold in verse 22. Behold, get ready, look out. I mean, think about when the word behold is used. Behold, the angel of the Lord told Mary. Behold, the angel told the shepherd. I mean, behold, this is like a big announcement. Get ready. And you go, okay, what are we getting ready for? Behold, a Canaanite woman. That's a whole lot of announcement. I mean, Matthew is going out of his way to show us that there's something different happening here. So I want to take both of those words, Canaanite and woman. If we compare this story to Mark's gospel, in Mark's gospel, he calls her the Syrophoenician woman. He calls her a Gentile. So Syrophoenician is a combination of Syria and Phoenicia, or Syria and Lebanon, right? So he's just saying, look, this is a woman who's mixed and she's from this area. She's a Gentile. That's enough said to know he's talking to not a Jewish person. But Matthew uses this term, Canaanite. Canaanite. In the words of theologian Kendrick Lamar, there's no way better that they could have said, they not like us. Canaanite, like this is an old word that he's resurrecting. He's not a theologian, for those who don't know Kendrick. Google him, you'll love it. He's using this old name. Why not just say she's a Gentile? But she's not any kind of non-Jewish woman. She's the kind of non-Jewish woman who's the ancestors of Israel's historic enemies. These were the people that when Israel went into the land, God said, hey, fight them, destroy them, kill them, drive them out. Don't make a treaty with them. And here she is one of the descendants of that. Now, the second half of that Canaanite woman is the phrase woman. I just need to preface this with these attitudes are not from the Bible that I'm about to share with you. They're not from Jesus. And in this present space, most importantly, they're not from me. This is just views from the time that were around this time. And so we're going, what is, the men who are walking around with Jesus, the men who are on the street, what is their impression of what's happening here? Why is this a problematic situation? Okay. Prefaces are out there. So one of the rabbis said that the female is irrelevant in creation. She's only like a leech clinging to the main thing, taken from it for its usage. Another one said, woe to him whose children are females. Another one said, once Eve was created, Satan was created with her. One says, whoever teaches his daughter Torah, the law, teaches her obscenity. Now think about the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy 6, they're told, teach your children. Doesn't just say teach your sons, it's teach your children. And the final one, it says, a man's spite is preferable to a woman's kindness. Women give rise to shame and reproach. So you don't really get the impression from those statements that a rabbi in the first century would have been desiring to talk to women, would have been desiring to hang out with women, would want to even be seen talking to a woman. So this is an interesting set of kind of cultural paradigms that are all merging in this one intersection, where this Canaanite woman, this woman who's very clearly a historic enemy of Israel, is coming to Jesus. And look at what she says in verse 22. Have mercy on us, son of David. You have a Canaanite appealing essentially to David, right? The son of David. Well, what does David have? Why is David special? God gives David a covenant that he's going to have an eternal throne, a covenant that the Messiah is coming through him. Now, the fascinating thing about covenants is covenants apply to the people to whom they're given. The blessing of the covenant is not promised to those outside of the covenant. It describes how God expects his people to act. It describes how God is going to act on behalf of his people. It sets up all of these terms, and it's kind of a life or death agreement that the person who makes this covenant with them establishes. And she's saying, look, hey, son of David, have mercy on me, a Canaanite woman. Why does she need mercy? My daughter is oppressed by a demon. Great. We have a Canaanite. We have a woman, and this woman's got a connection to demonic activity. Uh-oh. Jesus did not answer her a word. That was his response. Here she makes this impassioned plea, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on us. My daughter has a demon. I mean, this is very much on brand for Jesus to try to deal with, right? This is what he's been doing, helping people who are in need, who are helpless against the forces of darkness. He's been casting out demons. It's at this point in the interaction and the story, I think we have to realize that Jesus is speaking to two audiences simultaneously. And because of this, the story from this point forward gets a little bit messy. And if we don't understand this, it makes Jesus look kind of heartless and maybe even a little bit racist. And then randomly at the end, he changes his tune, and then it just doesn't make any sense. So we have to understand, there's two directions that this story is facing. Number one, Jesus is doing something in front of his disciples. And so I think all of the things that are relating to gender and the Canaanites and who Jesus can and should be talking to as a religious person, I think this is what he's modeling ministry looks like for his disciples. I think Jesus has been working with Gentiles to date, but this is the first time where he's really in Gentile territory. I mean, flip a few books over to Acts and you realize very quickly they get out of Israel into Gentile territory. It gets scary quickly when that happens for them. So I think insofar as he's speaking to his disciples, some of what he's saying is challenging their assumptions. I think their expectation is probably that he should say nothing to this Canaanite woman. And that's exactly what he does. She walks up, they all know who she is. She's making this plea to him, and Jesus kind of just follows the culture and goes, all right, I'm just gonna sit here quietly and say nothing. I don't think any of his disciples would have been upset, except that she continues talking to them. He is playing a role here, which almost seems to have cruelty at the heart of it. A desperate mother comes and begs to help his daughter. Again, this seems like something Jesus would be all about fixing. But the other direction of the story is towards this desperate woman, this woman who is a Canaanite, this woman who has no place in Israel, who has no inheritance in its covenants. Jesus is kind of giving her a test. You ever notice when some people say, hey, I need this healing, Jesus says, do you want to be healed? Some of this, I think he's asking about their faith, but some of it is, there's a practical aspect. I mean, imagine being lame for your whole life and you've sat by the pool and you've begged and people have taken care of you. While that doesn't sound desirable, you have a system that works. You also have not established other systems, right? You might not have established business relationships and connections. So to finally be healed of this thing, which of course you want to be healed from, sounds great until you realize, oh great, now what do I do with my life? Everyone else was, busy going to college and working on their professional lives, and here I've just been sitting here, a sad life, but at least I've been able to collect enough money to live. Do you want to be healed? Are you ready for the change that healing will take in your life? I think he's giving her a series of tests here, and he's testing her faith. So what's the disciples' response? Jesus sits there and does nothing, and they say, verse 23, send her away. She's crying after us. This woman won't stop. Now, on the surface level, this makes sense, at least to any Jewish man of the day. Hey, this woman, you're clearly not doing anything. Can you at least send her off so we can have some peace and quiet? But this also is an example that she's passed test one. Test number one is she's an outsider and she moves in to speak with Jesus. She knows who the Canaanites are. She knows who the Jews are. As hard and awkward as it is for the disciples, it's probably even more so for her to think, how do I come into this circle, which historically, they killed our people. They drove us out of our land. What do we do now? She's taking the step to move in, but when Jesus ignores her, she doesn't stop. She persists, she keeps going. Send her away could actually have two meanings. I think when we read it on the surface, we see this as a kind of a stiff arm of, look, Jesus, just get her out of our hair, kick her out. The other meaning though is, hey, Jesus, in asking you to send her away, we're also asking you to kind of fix her ailment, fix her problem and let her go. Let's take this one off the docket. And so we see Jesus' objection. He's actually kind of speaking to them. He says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Since he's objecting to their comment, I actually think of those two meanings, it's probable that they were asking for the latter of Jesus. We know you can do this. Would you just fix this and send her on her way? Jesus' response, it reiterates his own purpose, that he's going to the lost sheep of Israel. When he sends out the 12 disciples, he sends them out to the tribes. This was Matthew 10, a couple chapters back. 10:6, he's giving them instructions. He says, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so this is part of kind of Jesus's at least initial mission. I don't think it's the whole picture of his mission. We're going to talk about that. But in this initial mission that he's part of, he's trying to be a witness to the 12 tribes, to his own people. This is why he sends them out to the 12 tribes. This whole speech that he gives them there as they're being sent out, it has some very obvious references to the fact that while they're going to the house of Israel first, at some point they're going to be before Gentiles. That same chapter, verse 18 says, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. So even in Jesus' speech, sending out the 12 going, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, at the conclusion of that, he goes, hey, you're going to wind up in front of Gentiles. It's going to happen. Now, probably the most notable thing in this story of is Jesus really meaning what he's saying of I'm only going to talk to Jewish people or not is the fact that he's in fact in a very Gentile area of Tyre and Sidon, an area that has some historic complications in its relationship with Israel. More than that, he's not just talking to any Gentile person, he's talking to a Canaanite. And so both Matthew and Jesus, well, even though Jesus is saying, look, I'm only sent to Israel, he's kind of saying this and he's looking at the room going, do you catch what's really going on here? We're not actually only going to the house of Israel here. We have this Canaanite in front of us. We're here in this historic Canaanite land. Verse 24 says she kneels and says, Lord, help me. Her kneeling represents this humility that she has, this desperation of calling out to Jesus. Lord, help me. This is very similar chapter before to what Peter said. Peter goes out on the water and he starts sinking. And what does he say? Lord, save me. Chapter 14. This is test 2 passed. She heard him object. She heard his silence and she persisted. She heard him object and she's persisting. Jesus says, look, I'm only sent to the house of Israel. And she says, Lord, help me. So Jesus gives another objection, verse 26. It's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Ouch. The Jews often talked about the Gentiles as dogs in general. They talked about the Romans specifically as pigs, but just generally speaking, if you weren't Jewish, they kind of talked about you like you were a dog. And while this word carries this meaning here, Jesus is kind of using a cuter word. It doesn't mean just like a street dog or a ravaging dog. It doesn't mean the kind of insult that they would throw around. This is more kind of a cuter term that they would use maybe for like a house pet, a small dog in the story he's giving, it's sitting there under the table of children. So this is not some evil beast. But there's a bit of a double entendre, of course, with using the word dog and talking about a Gentile person, and maybe that's intentional. Maybe that's part of him letting the disciples be in on this and go, okay, how am I challenging their perceptions? Put yourself on the street right here in the first century, and again, you're probably not really shocked by this interaction. I mean, any Jewish rabbi at this time probably would have ignored her and probably would have said something that, at least on the surface like this, is somewhat off-putting of, look, please leave me be, go away. At least to a Jewish audience, that would have seemed acceptable. This is twice now that Jesus has insinuated that he is not for her. But the claim sounds bigger than just being about her. It's about his purpose to get to the lost sheep of Israel, not to focus on the dogs under the table. Paul says in Romans 1:16 says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. To the Jew first and also to the Greek. When we read Acts, we see where the gospel starts in Jerusalem and then Judea and Samaria, and it starts spreading out, right? To the Jew first. Look at the mission that Jesus has done. He sends his disciples to the 12 tribes, and then as they go to the 12 tribes, it begins expanding outward. In the book of Acts, as they get outside of Israel, as they get into Turkey and Greece, they go into the city. Where do they start first? The synagogue, to the Jew first, but also the Greek. Right after they get kicked out of the synagogue, they go into the marketplace. They go into the public forums, and they start sharing there. So the idea of being to the Jew first does not mean to the detriment of the Gentiles. God chose his people actually to be a witness and to be a light to the Gentiles. That is how this is working. And so Jesus is, for the second time, kind of implied, look, this isn't really for you. And when we look at all of Scripture, we understand Jesus is not meaning that in a literal sense. He's testing her again. Look at her response in verse 27. She doesn't miss a beat. She just picks up right there. She goes, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall. Test 1, 2, and now 3 are passed. Her answers navigate his intentions and demonstrate this kind of witty boldness in her answer. She was quick to use his own analogy, quick to use his own words to make one final impassioned plea. We have a winner here. And his response in verse 28, great is your faith. Her faith compares to the centurion. There's not that many times where Jesus talks about how great someone's faith is, and it's interesting that the majority of the times he's actually talking about someone who's a Gentile. With the centurion comes and his servant is sick and dying, and Jesus says, look, let's go. And he says, no, you don't bother yourself. Just say the word. I'm a man under authority. I understand authority. You speak the word, it'll be done. And Jesus speaks the word. He says, look, I haven't seen such great faith in all of Israel. Now we're outside of Israel, and Jesus is saying what? How great is your faith? It compares to the centurion. It contrasts to the disciples. The most unlikely person in this whole script so far is the one who contrasts with what the disciples have been doing. Just a couple chapters ago, as Peter last chapter, as Peter is trying to walk on the water, as he sinks below, the first words out of Jesus' mouth is, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? That's something that's repeated again and again to the disciples. Do you not understand? Do you still not believe? Oh, you of little faith, why are you afraid? Why did you doubt? These are the things being repeated to the men who are these ones who are chosen to follow him, to walk with him. They are having to learn a hard lesson that it seems like for others, they already understand. It was done as she desired. To the ones who should be following Jesus, some of them, they're misunderstanding. Some of them are doubting. Some of them are confusing him with other people. Some of them are plotting against him now. But to the woman who's the outsider, she is declared to be a person of faith, that she had great faith. The next story, we see where he has mercy for outcasts in verse 29. And it says, Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee, and he went up on the mountain and sat down there. And great crowds came to him, and bringing with them the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others. And they put them at his feet, and he healed them. So the crowd wondered when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled healthy, the lame walking, the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. Verse 29, he went up on the mountain and he sat down. This is very similar language to what was used in Matthew 5, where he goes up on a mountain and he teaches them. Now we start seeing a bit of a repetition in some of these stories. We see where this story and the next story, Jesus feeds 4,000, and they kind of have these echoes of other stories. And so one thing to note is where they are. Matthew's letting us know that they're still in Gentile territory. So he's up in Tyre and Sidon. He's up in essentially Lebanon. And he comes back to the Sea of Galilee. And it says he walks by the sea and then he goes up on a mountain. They're in a deserted place. And he doesn't name a town or anything. But if you look at the map, you go, where are the deserted places? The deserted places are on the east side of the lake. They're on the Jordanian side of the lake in modern terms. And I think another tip of the hat of he's still not working with Jews proper yet, is that they're using this phrase, the God of Israel. He closes the story with, they praise the God of Israel, which would be a weird thing for Jews to say because they would just call him God. But here, these people are saying they praise the God of Israel. So again, this whole section, he's dealing with outsiders. If we read Mark 7, which is dealing with the same story, he's essentially here in the same area where he healed the demoniac. So Jesus crosses from where he was in Galilee, crosses the lake, and then he's in this Gentile area before he comes back. Who are these people, though, that he's working with? Earlier in the passage, when Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, he quotes Isaiah 29:13-14. He says, the Lord said, because the people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me, and the fear of me is a commandment taught by men. Therefore, behold, I will again do wonderful things with this people, with wonder upon wonder, and the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the discernment of their discerning shall be hidden. Jesus is comparing his previous conversation with the Pharisees of, hey, you are these ones that Isaiah was prophesying about. Last week, I quoted the next couple verses. I'll quote them again. If you go down from that in Isaiah 29, verse 18 says, in that day, the deaf shall hear the words of a book, and out of their gloom and darkness, the eyes of the blind shall see. The meek shall obtain fresh joy in the Lord, and the poor among mankind shall exalt in the Holy One of Israel. Why is this location important? Why is this passage from Isaiah important? Why is the repetition of these stories important? It's because he's replicating what he's done for the Jews. He's now replicating for the Gentiles. This gets to the heart of Matthew and his focus on the mission of Jesus, the broader mission of Jesus. The Pharisees are the ones who honor God with their lips and their hearts are far away. Meanwhile, the ones who are blind see, the meek are joyful, the poor are rejoicing. But these aren't just any meek and blind and poor. The ones that he's referencing are these meek, these blind, these poor. Jesus has just come speaking with the elite, and he said, look, your hearts are far from God. Now he goes into Gentile territory, and this other side of that same passage is being lived out where the meek and the blind and the poor are receiving the promises of God. The Pharisees are far from God. The Gentiles are receiving the promises. We see where there's mercy for the hungry. In verse 32, he goes on, he says, then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the crowd because they've been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. I'm unwilling to send them away lest they faint on the way. And the disciples said to him, where are we to get enough bread in such a desolate place to feed so great a crowd? Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? They said 7 and a few small fish. And directing the crowd to sit down on the ground, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds, and they all ate and were satisfied. And he took up 7 baskets full of broken pieces left over. Those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And after sending away the crowds, he got in the boat and went to the region of Magadan. Again, we have a story that's repeated. For critics of the Bible, they feel like some of these repeated stories are later additions, that someone who's writing the text is just going, oh, we need more miracles for Jesus. Let's copy and paste and add them in. They think it too closely replicates the feeding of the 5,000. But I think in the context of the chapter, it's clear as to why Jesus is repeating the miracles that he's been doing. All of the wonders he did inside of Israel, he's now doing outside of Israel proper. Matthew includes these stories because he has a deep missionary concern for the Gentiles. This begins in the genealogy where we see him noting who are the Gentile outsiders in the line of this Messiah. It ends in the book with the Great Commission in the last chapter. And every section in between, Matthew keeps highlighting how Jesus has concern for the nations, not just Israel. There's similarities in both cases. Between the feeding of the 5,000 and this story, both are crowds of thousands. Both miracles start with a need to send a crowd away for them to have a meal. And then the meal is provided. Both stories start with loaves and fishes. And both include counted baskets of leftovers. But there's some differences, some key differences. They're in a different area. They're somewhere in the region that the healing of the demoniac happened. This is a Gentile area on the other side of the sea. In this story, Jesus is the one who initiates the need to feed people. In the feeding of the 5,000, it's the disciples. To me, one of the most intriguing distinctions in this story is when they count the baskets left over, there's 2 very distinct numbers. In the feeding of the 5,000, it's 12 baskets. Do you remember that? 12 baskets, 12 tribes. There's a symbolism here. There's a kind of echo back with Moses feeding the children of Israel in the wilderness. Hey, God is here for you. There's enough for every single tribe. He sees you. But here we're not talking to the 12 tribes, are we? There's no need for the symbolic 12 baskets left over. There's 7 left over. Jesus is demonstrating his power among the Gentiles in the same way he had done among the Jews. And this story closes with Jesus going back across the lake to a town called Magadan. This is a different name for a town that's on the west side of the sea, where Jesus spent a lot of his time. And so we see him just kind of going back and forth across the sea. What does all of this mean for us? Number one, I would say never give up asking God for help. Never give up asking God for help. What would have happened if she had given up? Now, let me just say, that's speculation. We don't know. The only story we have is she didn't give up. It could have been like Peter. You know, Peter wasn't successful. I brought that out of that story. He wasn't successful, and maybe that was the point. Maybe the point was for him to sink, to be rescued. Maybe had he had enough faith, Jesus would have just backed up a little bit more, right? So maybe had she not asked, Jesus would have come through anyway. We don't know. The story we do have, she does continue to persist, and that seems to be the basis on which Jesus is impressed. The example here is be persistent. Don't give up asking God for help. Don't take no for an answer. Find a way of using his words, of using his metaphors to ask him according to his word. Jesus is looking for a faith that is desperate for him. He's looking for a faith that puts all of their eggs in his basket. Sometimes when we approach Jesus, I think we do that as an A and B kind of plan. I have my system. I probably should get Jesus' blessing on my system. So let me go to him, let me pray, and we'll see what happens, right? But meanwhile, I'm praying. I don't have to really fully throw myself on Jesus because I actually still have my system. This is easy to do when things are small, right? Your child has a cold, you take him to the doctor, you say a prayer, and at the end of the week, everyone goes home happy. It gets a lot harder when it gets more serious. But the same thing is true. Jesus is looking for faith that is desperate for him. He's not looking for faith that has an exit strategy, that has a plan B, and that's wearing a parachute. Don't give up. Are you outside the gate this morning? Have people told you, hey, Jesus, he's not really for people like you. You need to clean yourself up. You need to really work on yourself. You need to be a better person, and then maybe Jesus will let you in. I would say those people just don't understand Jesus. Call out to him for his mercy. He is for everyone. Number two, never ostracize outsiders. With God, being an insider or an outsider has nothing to do with gender and ethnicity and culture and status and religion and language and power. It has none of those things. We see again and again where the people who think they're on the in are not, and the people who think they're on the out are actually accepted by God and approved by God. Birthright means nothing. With God, being an insider has to do with faith. You can be from one of the historic families of Israel, from the tribe of Abraham, from the stock of Abraham. We could modernize this, say you could be from our church, you could be one of the historic families of Mountain View. It doesn't matter. Hebrews says without faith, it is impossible to please God. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, how much you have. And the reverse is true. You can be as far from God as you are. You can be born in the right family. You can be powerless and marginalized and poor. And you can be a part of God's family simply through one thing, faith. She had no hope, no expectation. She had no contract that she could show going, look, God, you actually owe me this kind of protection. She had none of that. And yet she cast all of her hope on him and she received the blessing that she was looking for. God's plan is for everyone. It's to the farthest reaches of the world. It's to the hardest places, to the hardest people, to the people farthest from God. We are not the gatekeepers to keep people outside. The disciples try this in certain ways on certain occasions where you can just see them where they, if we read it in the good light, okay, maybe they're trying to help her so she'll go, but whether they're trying to just get her away without helping her or help her so she'll go, the key word here is so she'll go. Even helping her, they really just don't want her around. And we see Jesus again and again through the scriptures, picking these people that everyone else in the community goes, I don't know that that's your person. And yet Jesus loves them. We need to be careful about not being, God's bouncer and just keeping these people away from him. God seems to be going and seeking and finding those kind of people. We need to be welcoming them in. Let me close this in a word of prayer. God, you've given us a very hard story to understand of why was this woman ignored? Why was there the indifference and the tests and the hoops she jumped through? And yet it also gives us one of the most interesting pictures of faith. A woman who had no right, who had no claim, who had every reason to be rejected or to want to reject them, and yet she came into the space and she cried again and again and again. We see where you have done for the nations what you did for your nation. We know later in Scripture that there's no distinction between Jew and Gentile, that you have saved us all, that you have died for all of us, that if we believe in you, faith becomes the marker of who is yours, not birthright. God, I pray for our faith this morning, whether it's faith to be saved, if that's what we're struggling with, that you would speak to us, that you would show us your way. You would give us the faith to believe in you, to follow you, to trust your claims that you died for us. And in replacement, you give us your life. But sometimes we're like this woman. We have a problem in our life that is insurmountable, that can't be solved by human intervention, and our only hope is you. It is a fearful thing to be in that situation. It is a fearful thing to cry out to you in that time. Sometimes we feel that deafening silence, but God, give us the faith to persist in asking. We ask this in your name.